Hey everyone, back again. Nathan, Absurd Being, you know the drill. This time around it's Emmanuel Levinas with Totality and Infinity. And I'm not going to waste your time rambling about this, that, or the other thing. We're just going to dive straight into the text. I'm going to go through each. He breaks the book down into 4 sections, and each section's divided up into about 4 or 5 subsections. And basically, I'm just going to work through those subsections one by one. And each subsection will be a video. I think some of those subsections get quite small, so I might put a few of them together. Some of them are a bit longer; they may turn into 2 videos, but we'll see how we go. But that's the basic plan. So let's get into it with section 1, the same and the other, and the A subsection, metaphysics and transcendence. So this first part of the book is really just kind of setting the stage, just defining terms. And with that in mind, we'll jump straight into the first part of today's video, which I've called metaphysics. All right, so metaphysics, this is one of those words that I think almost everybody has slightly different sense of. I've written a lot about metaphysics and what I see as the difference between metaphysics, ontology, and phenomenology. And the way I see metaphysics is completely different to the way that Levinas treats it. But to be fair, I think Levinas treats it completely differently to the way anybody else treats metaphysics. But so what does Levinas have to say about this? Well, he defines metaphysics as absolute exteriority. So whatever concerns something which is absolutely, fundamentally other, different, which can't be brought into a kind of totalizing relationship. And an important concept here in Levinas's understanding of metaphysics is a metaphysical desire, which he writes with a capital D. And this desire is a desire for, or a directedness towards, the other, and that fundamentally separate, distant, removed, unattached, capital O other, an other that we can't enter into a bond such that we kind of draw them into ourselves. So this metaphysics is a desire for directedness towards this absolute other, this other. We don't know what it is just yet, but whatever it is, it's unable to be brought into our kind of our sphere, our world, a part of me. And he uses various words for this, but things like absolute alterity and absolute exteriority, and probably one that makes most sense is transcendence, or one that's liable to most misinterpretation anyway, or misunderstanding. Transcendence. So this other that we desire in metaphysics is an absolutely transcendent other, in the sense that it's forever separate from us. We can never bring it into our orbit and make it kind of a part of my existence, a part of my world, a part of my life. It always stands transcend. It always transcends my attempt to bring it into such a relationship. So it's always transcendent. This metaphysical desire then that we have can't be satisfied. It's a directedness to, desire for that other, but because the other is an absolute exteriority, it's a complete, total transcendence, we can never satisfy that desire. And the way that Levinas puts this is he says, the metaphysician and the other cannot be totalised. And that's a nice link to the title of the book. Tells us what he's getting at, totality and infinity. So that's the first half. Totality is this capacity to make something one with you, to become one with something, to enter into a relationship such that the other and you form two parts of a whole, form two parts of a system. And that's what Levinas calls a totality. So when you have the situation where you and the other cannot be totalised, the other is an absolute exteriority, transcendent. This is metaphysics. And he contrasts this with need. So need is a desire for something that I can totalize, something that can be totalized. I can enter into that, a relationship such that me and this other thing just become two parts of a system, two poles even of a whole. And then these things that we desire and need, they can satisfy me because in entering into this relationship, where this relationship of totality, I absorb their alterity. I absorb the other's otherness, reducing them to the same, reducing them to this whole, this totality, which is me, which I'm a part of. And actually it is me, because it's I bring them into my world, my existence, my life. So reducing the alterity of the other, bringing it into a totality, a relationship of sameness, that is what need is, and that's in contrast to this idea of metaphysical desire. So that's metaphysics. Let's have a look at some of the key relationships in this first part. So first we look at the I. And with the I, Levinas is talking about an entity which exists as identical to itself. So that's obviously the human being. And here's his definition. A being whose existing consists in identifying itself, in recovering its identity throughout all that happens to it. Basically, that is consciousness, right? Being conscious, self-conscious, if you like, conscious of oneself. So our existence, my existence, your existence, consists in being one with what I am, being one with who I am, being myself totally. So there is a complete identification there. And whatever I do, I am always me. And I have this relation of identity is at the core of every human being's being. So even though there is an alterity here, because I'm conscious of myself, so there is this, I guess in a sense, there's an object set up that is an other and an alter. But this alterity, this other that I set up, this object, which is myself, is an alterity that merges with itself. So I am in this, it's like, maybe you could describe it as like a quasi-object. It's not real. It's not a real exterior. It's not an absolute other. It's not a genuine object separate from me, because at every point I reclaim that object as a part of me. And the object is myself. So it's there is an alterity here at the core of human existence, but it's an alterity that we reclaim at every moment. So it ends up being a relation of sameness, of totality. And this identification of the same, the I with itself, is the concreteness of egoism. So that's just, again, just kind of more terms, more definitions. Ego, that's the selfness, the sameness that's at the core of a human being, an I. So that's the first relationship that Levinas talks about, the I, our relationship with ourselves, which is a relationship of identity. The second relationship he mentions is our relation to the world. And in this, the I and the world, the relation between these two is, again, not one of alterity, but one that Levinas calls a sojourn. So it's, again, we might tend to see the world, or may think of the world as kind of a foreign place, alien to me, different from me. It's kind of a real existential way of thinking about it, right? I'm cast adrift in this world where everything's kind of different, foreign. I have to work to make sense of it. It's absurd. But for Levinas, he says that's not true. The world doesn't have that kind of absolute alterity for us. It's a sojourn. It's more like a visit to a place that we're familiar with, that we know well. And in fact, he calls our relation, he talks about this relation we have with the world as a dwelling at home with oneself, which is very Heideggerian language. But again, it's reflecting that idea that yes, we can see the world as kind of foreign and with alien things to us and absurd things that don't make sense, things that we can't properly make sense of, make coherent use of. But that absurdity comes on top of something which is a deeper kind of relation, which is one of familiarity, one of being at home. If you didn't have that deeper sense of familiarity with the world, you couldn't feel absurdity, because there wouldn't be anything to ground your absurdity on. We are in this world, which can then appear absurd or non-absurd, whatever the case may be. But there's a deeper connection, and that's kind of what I think Heidegger got at, and that's what Levinas is repeating here. So in light of this, he says the world is not a container, but a site where I can. So it's not this kind of geometric or mathematical or abstract container in which I'm thrown. It's more like a site. So it has that sense of, again, familiarity, a sense of belongingness maybe. It's a site where I can. So immediately I am in this place where possible actions call to me, invite me to do things. It's a little bit more, it's not really, Levinas doesn't say that, but I'm just reading into it from, that would be it's kind of the way that Merleau-Ponty talks about it. But I'm thrown into this place where I'm called to action at each moment, and all of my actions make sense, right? I mean, I know what to do. I know how to live. And that's my fundamental relation to the world. So everything in the world admits of a relationship with me originally. And that's why Levinas talks about this as not being an absolute other. So things may seem to have this kind of absurdity or incoherence, but they lose their alterity, they lose that otherness when they're brought into that relationship with me. And related to this, he also talks about negativity a little bit. And by negativity, I mean like a resistance, I want to do something, I want to use something, I want to achieve something, but I'm prevented from doing so, or there's effort that I have to expend in order to do it. That effort that's required reflects the negativity of something else. So something kind of an obstacle in front of me. That's what he means by negativity here. But even this negativity that things present, that I have to overcome in order to use them, that's not alterity for Levinas. In any relation where negator and negated are posited together, they form a system. That is a totality. And again, so we're back to that idea. You've got this negation, you've got this force seemingly working against you. You have to overcome it to make use of an object or something. So that you might think this thing is completely foreign. It's different from me. I have to battle with it in order to I have to subdue it. I have to overcome it in order to make use of it. Isn't there an alterity there? Isn't there a sense of otherness in that? But Levinas is saying, if you've got a negative, you've got something to resist you, then you are in a totality, a totalizing relationship already. It's not an absolute other, because it admits of something for you. It has some meaning. It has some relevance. You're trying to use it to do something, which means you've brought it into your sphere into your world. It's now a part of you and your life. You have to do something to it. You have to overcome it in some way in order to make use of it, perhaps. But it's there as another part of this whole system, which is you and your life. And the same thing can be, so that's kind of talking about matter, objects, and the same can be said with resisting a situation. The situation doesn't become an other, capital O other, because again, I'm at a deeper level. Beneath this resistance, there is a deeper connection, which allows that resistance to take place in the first place, allows that resistance to arise. Without that connection, the resistance isn't possible. So there's a deeper sense in which we are connected, and the alterity of the situation then disappears in the face of that. So that's the world, and the final relationship that he talks about is our relation to the other people, that is. And this relationship with other people is one that is truly other for Levinas. So the other's alterity, the other's otherness, can never be taken away from them. They are always completely other, completely separate from us, completely transcendent to us. We're never able to bring them into this totalizing relationship that is a relationship of sameness, a relationship that is me, my totality, my sameness, my world, my life. Okay, so this relationship to the other to other people is transcendence. Levinas uses the term stranger, capital S, stranger, to refer to the other person, and that's a reflection of this. They are completely beyond me, completely beyond a totalizing relationship. And this is exactly what we talked about at the beginning. This is the metaphysical transcendent relation of desire, and this Levinas calls the relation of face to face, and that's going to become an important concept a little bit later on. And something that Levinas mentions here, which I'll throw in as well, which is a little bit more suspect, he proposes that we call this bond, this kind of bond, religion. And I'm a little bit wary of this because on one hand you can see what he's getting at, right? A relation with a transcendent other, an absolute alterity that we can never totalize, we can never bring into the sameness of the I. What better way to define religion, right? A relation with transcendence, standing before an absolute other that we can never totalize. Fine, fair enough. But that's not, I mean, and in a way it is the way religion is defined, but it's defined in relation to a specific other, right? God, a deity, a divinity. And that then starts getting a little bit starts drifting a little bit from the rigorous philosophy we were just doing into like religion, right? It's drifting into religion and all of the supernatural and the dogma and everything that comes with it. And what gives me pause with this is that it's taking that legitimacy that we've established with an absolute other, recognizing an absolute alterity in other people, that they always transcend the sameness of the I. They always transcend me. They're always beyond me. Calling that transcendence, that's concrete. It's real. It's as solid as you can get. It's as legitimate. It has real credibility, right, as a philosophical idea. But then kind of trading off on this and applying it to another idea which perhaps doesn't have the same philosophical credibility, legitimacy, the existence of God. It's just like kind of trying to borrow some of the credibility that we've established here with this idea of this transcendent other and other people falling into that category, and just kind of sliding it into religion and giving religion a little bit of credibility that I don't think it deserves here. Whether you believe in God or not is irrelevant, but the fact that you believe in a relation with other people has no bearing on whether you can have a relationship with a God, if he or she or it or whatever exists, right, in the first place. So this kind of there's a link being drawn here, I think, that's worth being wary of, and we'll see this come up later. It's one of the reasons I kind of never followed up Levinas any further, because he really does start drifting into trying to give credibility, I think, to Judaism, and so to God, and all of the stories that come along with that, and all of the supernatural ideas and so on and so forth. And yeah, that really just turned me off a little bit. But that aside, this is all great. This is all really interesting stuff. The idea of other people as an absolute alterity. We can't totalize them. It's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Really original, I think, way of thinking about this stuff. All right, let's have a look at the next section, which is ontology and ethics. All right, so in this section, we're going to look at knowledge and comprehension. Knowledge is the attempt to establish a relation in which the other is respected in their alterity. So having a relation, getting a relationship underway, but maintaining the other's alterity. So not bringing them into a relation of sameness, keeping them respecting their alterity. However, when we have theory, when we build the theory, when we attempt to overcome that distance, then this leads to comprehension, which Levinas treats as a little bit different. Comprehension establishes a relation in which the alterity of the other is lost. So there's a difference in Levinas between knowledge and comprehension. And comprehension, in order to overcome this alterity of the other, requires a third neutral term to deaden the shock of the encounter. Quite like that expression. So a third term to kind of bridge the gap, if you like, to mediate this relation between me and the other. And for the examples that he gives are things like concepts, sensations, or being in general. Being in general, so that most general level of existence, things that exist, as contrasted with the existent itself. So being in general is used as a kind of way to overcome this gap, this distance that exists between me and another. And when we use one of these neutral terms, we can overcome that distance and ensure its comprehension. And the result then, though, is that things are grasped in general, not as individuals. So we do succeed in bringing the other into this relation of sameness, but it's kind of bought at the cost of knowing the other, as an individual. Instead, we get to know them as a general category. And that is precisely what Levinas calls ontology, what Levinas sees ontology as doing. Theory as comprehension is ontology for Levinas. So there's that distinction there between knowledge and comprehension, and you can kind of make sense of that ontology there being part of overcoming the distance between me and the other through being in general. I mean, and that's exactly what ontology is, study of being. But being in general necessarily means we're understanding something at a general level, not as an individual. So not respecting that alterity, that absolute otherness that's inherent in the object. We're just getting we're getting the object as mediated by a third term, in this case being in general. And so that's comprehension, which also promotes freedom, because defined as the sovereignty of the I, promotes freedom over justice. Justice as which arises in the relation with the genuine other. Justice in the sense that we're treating the other with all of the rights that they deserve as an absolute other. So it's just in that sense. That's how Levinas is talking about freedom and justice. So kind of pitting them against each other here. We get freedom, the sovereignty of the I, the complete understanding of everything, the ability to use everything, bring everything into my sphere, totalize everything. And this idea of justice, where we respect the alterity of the other and don't try and diminish them or bring them into my sphere through one of these mediating terms, through being in general. And so comprehension achieves that, promotes freedom over justice, because it dissolves that alterity, gets over that original otherness that we saw in the metaphysical relation. And he talks a little bit about critique as well, and critique is for Levinas a calling into question of the same. So, a calling into question of the same, what does that mean? A calling into question of this relation of sameness, this totality that we, through comprehension, through ontology, that we set up, that we erect. So calling into question this and trying to bring us back to alterity, the absolute other, to a relation which respects the absolute other of the other, the absolute otherness of the other. So critique is a calling into question of the same, and this leads us into ethics, which is specifically a calling into question of the same brought about by the presence of the other. By the presence of the other, I mean by the presence of other people. So that's kind of ethics. Ethics is a kind of critique in that sense, that it challenges this notion of the totality, that relation of sameness, which I am, through the interjection, if you like, of another person who is fundamentally transcendent, who fundamentally transcends me, absolutely beyond me. I like that, actually. That's a nice way of thinking about ethics, which we'll look at in a lot more detail later. But there's definitely some good stuff coming regarding that. The final section in today's video is called infinity. Right, so if we think about infinity, what Levinas says about this is that the ideatum, the actual object itself, surpasses the idea we have of it. So infinity itself is always more than the idea that we can form of it. It always escapes the idea that any idea that we can try and use to rein it in, to put it in a box so that we can understand it. Because it's always more than that. As soon as we try and fix infinity as a thing, it's always escaped that already, right? Because it goes on forever. So whenever we try and lock infinity as a concept, it's always surpassed by actual infinity itself, because infinity itself, by definition, cannot be locked in a concept, cannot be fixed, held into one, forced into one kind of idea, can't be enclosed in a single idea. It's by definition, it escapes that. That's what it is to be infinite, to always be more, right? To always have more. So infinity is an interesting thing in the sense that it always surpasses the idea that we have of it. And so how then, he asks, does the idea of the infinite arise in the finite? And that's a question that actually that was used in scholasticism. Was it scholasticism? I'm not sure who actually came up with it now. Spinoza? Descartes? Someone used it as an argument for the existence of God, that there's no way for a finite being, I think it's Descartes, as I say it, I think it's Descartes, there's no way for a finite being to have an idea of the infinite, to even conceive of the infinite, unless it was put there by an infinite being. So that's one of, pretty sure it's Descartes, his arguments for the existence of God. And so Levinas brings that in here. How does the idea of the infinite arise in the finite? So he doesn't answer it with God just yet anyway, but he says it arises in the form of desire, this capital D desire, metaphysical desire. So it's a desire that can't be satisfied, a desire for this absolute other. And through that's how this concept that's how this idea of the infinite arises in us, through metaphysical desire. And this is exactly what we've been talking about, transcendence and the other person. So the infinite is the absolutely other, and the absolute other as the other person always exceeds the idea that I have of them. So that bringing in the connecting those two ideas, in the infinity and the other person. So infinity always exceeds the idea we have of it. The other person also always exceeds the idea that I have of them. I can never completely bring them in a satisfying way into one representation, into one mental representation, an idea. That there's always something over and above that I can never lock down and never hold completely. So I never fully grasp the other person. They're always kind of overflowing the idea I have, in the same way that infinity overflows our idea of it. And he talks about how other people are able to do this, how they're able to exceed the idea we have of them. And he uses the word expression here. He says they exceed our idea by expressing themselves. And expression, it's in italics in the book, and the idea here is that it takes on kind of a special meaning because it's what characterizes them as this absolute alterity. It's why we can never get a grasp of them, because they're always able to bring more to the table than we can with our kind of plastic image. The idea that we have of them is always kind of, no matter how much we try and capture the dynamic nature of another person, that dynamicity itself always exceeds our idea of it. And I think it's that Levinas is trying to get at here with this word expression. They're in being able to express themselves, they're always automatically, by definition of what it is to express oneself, they are escaping any of the ideas that we try and fix them into, to lock them into. And this is exactly what Levinas calls face. And that, I said before, I've mentioned that the face-to-face relation, that will become a really important idea in totality and infinity. So face is the way that the other always exceeds the idea I have of them. And so it reflects that sense of infinity. And that's what brings us back to the title. That's the other half, totality and infinity. Infinity is this transcendence. It reflects this absolute otherness that we can never overcome, that always exceeds our idea, no matter how carefully we try and construct our theories or our ontology or our concepts. There's always something over and above that in the other here. Another word that comes into play towards the end of this first part is conversation, and that also has a kind of special meaning for Levinas. Conversation is to receive from the other beyond the capacity of the eye. So again, the other is always beyond us. They're always outside of our relation of sameness. We can't totalize them. And so conversation is this, we're receiving something genuinely foreign, genuinely new, something that we could never come up with ourselves. Not in the sense that I can't come up with the same ideas that you can, but in the sense that they're your ideas. They're coming from a place which is completely other to me. And it's that which is what Levinas calls conversation, this contact, if you like, with something completely foreign, something that's completely beyond our ability to lock down anywhere and fix in an idea. And so conversation here gives us that sense of the infinite. We've got this thing forever beyond us, which we can never get to. And again, just linking that with infinity. And finally, this idea, this transcendence, this infinity, puts our freedom into question. In the same way that we saw, in the exact opposite way that we saw, comprehension promotes freedom, promotes that sovereignty of the I by bringing everything into my orbit. The absolute other, infinity, puts that freedom into question, because the thing that we are in conversation with, the thing that we are in a relation with, is completely beyond our influence. They're completely beyond my capacity, beyond my I can. That I can, that ability to influence, to act upon, to do something with, only applies to things in my world that I can totalize, that I can bring into my world. But I can't do that with other people. They're forever beyond me. They're characterized by that infinity. Which isn't to say, of course, that I can't make people do things, right? I can't, or I have no influence over them at all. But it just means that whatever influence I have, it's up to them to reciprocate, or it's up to them to exceed. No, I'm missing it here. It's up to them to accept my requests, my attempts at influence. If they say no, that's it. I mean, I can try and force it, but that, in a sense, they're still escaped me. They're still beyond me. I have to force it because I can't, because they are completely other. There is no other option for me, because they stand completely beyond the sameness of the I, that I am. Okay, let me stop there. I think that's kind of that's the first part anyway, metaphysics and transcendence. Let's have a quick look at a summary. So my summary today is not going to follow the course of the video. I'm just going to try and summarize it with respect to the title of the book. So if we start with totality, totality is a relation in which the alterity of the other term disappears. Another word for this was sameness. Bringing things into a relation, so there is no other. They become a part of me. They become a whole with me, even if they're a different part. Maybe they're an opposite part even, but they're still a part of a totalised system. Two relations that we had that reflected totality. The first was I, the relation of I with myself, my consciousness of myself, at bottom is a relation of identity, and the world. And this we talked about as a dwelling at home with oneself, so being kind of in a familiar place. Everything is able to be totalized, brought into this relation of sameness. And in relation to this, we also talked about comprehension, which was the way that we use a third term to overcome the alterity of the other. And this is kind of the mechanics of how we bring the other into a totalized relation. Specifically, ontology there was interesting, which let us overcome alterity through being in general. And it gave us comprehension. It let us understand the thing, but only as a general idea, general concept. We didn't get the thing itself. We didn't get the individual. The second important point was metaphysics, and this was quite interesting for me to see how Levinas defines metaphysics. I've spent a little bit of time thinking about what metaphysics is, so it was quite interesting to see this. Metaphysics is a relation in which the alterity of the other term is preserved. And this is a capital D desire which can't be satisfied. So it's a directing. Metaphysics is kind of a directedness to this absolute other that we can never have. And the relation that reflected this was our relation to other people, the other person, which Levinas calls the face-to-face relation. And an important part of that is ethics. And this is a calling into question of the same, that sameness, that totalizing relation by another person. So the appearance of another person throws that sameness, that identity, that relation of identity that we have into question. And ethics is dealing with that interjection of this absolute other. How do we deal with it? What do we do with that? And finally, the other half of the title of the book, Infinity. And infinity is an idea in which the ideatum surpasses the idea we have of it. So infinity itself is always beyond our ability to capture, to wrap up in a single idea, to adequately and completely represent to ourselves as an idea. It always, by definition, by the very nature of what it is, it always overflows that idea. And that is the first part of Totality and Infinity. So hopefully that helped a little bit, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for listening as always. See you in the second round.